Okay, guys, this is part two. Sort of got cut off in the first part, but I know exactly where I was. I was just talking about Pook and this transition that occurred because of the internet and the kind of mass movement of the manosphere, the red pill community, onto the internet, and how there was a transition from the classical publishing industry of the Neil Strausses and the mystery types and the kind of journalistic element of that, the true life component of that, to this EvoPsych dominated online field report after action report, more shallow, superficial style, frankly. But I think that is an important transition in the ideology that we're discussing, in the literature that we're discussing, these memoirs. And I was saying Pook sort of started this because he was the one who sort of elevated it at the beginning by, like trying to make it more than just about I'm out there boffing women or, whatever, being a misogynist or whatever. I'm actually doing something by trying to educate you. So like I said, he had this kind of quasi-literary ambitions. And there's a number of guys who became hugely influential in that space. And I'll talk about them now, of which I was going to backtrack for a second because I wanted to mention one of the guys who predated Strauss and Mystery and everybody else, but became immensely influential on them. And that was Robert Glover, his series. And so I've got the one that is most well known is the No More Mr. Nice Guy that he wrote. Again, I think, No More Mr. Nice Guy is like a misnomer. It's kind of an Orwellian term when you're talking about somebody who's so-called not so nice. But what they really mean is like he uses this term covert contracts, but he really means is like somebody who's misleading or deceptive for the purpose of seduction. And, that's what it is. I don't know what the better term would be, but anyway, that's what he's describing. Now, the thing that's interesting about Glover, though, is that he was like a victim of his own success. See, that's why I have a bunch of these books, because what he wrote this one in like 2000 or even earlier. He was a group therapist, men's kind of therapy psychologist. And so he was looking at it from that perspective. But what he ended up doing was, because his marriage collapsed, and he became the pickup artist. So he went into this business of self-publication and I'm sure it was very successful in that regard. Here they are. These are these books. Okay, so he wrote this one, Dating Essentials for Men, wildly popular. There he is, Robert Glover. He had a FAQ about this. He has like a podcast. It's all connected with their podcasting sector, right? And then Tony Endelman, he has followers who wrote other books based on that. And what's interesting about him is he basically did the same thing that I'm doing here, which is he went out and actually did some of the research on these guys, read their literature, and then came up with his sort of own method. But the thing that's interesting about him is that his method is very similar to their method ultimately. He says he doesn't like pickup artistry. He doesn't like what he calls geeks with techniques, because he thinks it's too shallow, which it is very shallow. But so he has his own system. However, his system is actually very similar to theirs, which is you go out and you test and you look for indicators of interest. And just like the rules, you play hard to get, and you have what do they call it? Abundance mentality. So he uses a lot of the same terminology as them. He uses the same concepts. He just kind of tweaks the terminology. He talks about I think the Great Cake of Life was one of his. But this is coming from Mystery. It was all going back to the same basis. So, but I think he was doing this because he kind of trying to detoxify it a little bit, because like I said, this internet online community, the red pill thing is quite toxic and very confrontational to some people, and there's a lot of drama in that space as well. Or at least there was. But so I raised Glover because he was hugely influential on all of these guys. They all cite No More Mr. Nice Guy, and this concept of covert contracts is wildly popular in this space. So it's definitely important to know about him and read him. But the thing that's critical here is that he made this transition to self-publishing, where you're going to have your own business model around this, and that involves you're doing the podcasts, you're doing the interviews, you're writing you're producing your own literature. So it becomes, you're doing the group sessions, the group therapy sessions, which are like the boot camps in a way. So it becomes this business, right? It's a hustle. It's its own big hustle thing, which is totally, you should by this point should be expected, because as we're saying, a lot of this just comes from this sales mentality, marketplace, econometric, assumption, which is very. I think that's an ideological proposition. You'd have to, it's sort of a different topic, but like, is the basis of our modern society completely econometric, or is there some other? Is it like Talcott Parsons? Is it really a social interaction? Is it something more fundamental than that? And is it like maybe even the evolutionary biologists, the evolutionary psychologists are correct? Maybe it's something from our distant past. Anyway, so there's different ways you can approach. I think obviously other ideologies, political ideologies, or whatever you want to call them, exist. So there's different ways to look at this. But the baseline assumption of the pickup artistry community is that it's a marketplace. It is therefore a business. And so you're engaged in a business proposition, and which means you have to be doing that business. You have to be on your hustle, on your grind. This is like a very Andrew Tate, Dan Bilzerian kind of concept, isn't it? So should not be surprising. Now, I was going to say, so there's quite a few of these guys then who rose up from that so suave red pill community selling this ideology, right? Like I said, selling this ideology, and of which the by far the most successful of them by like mile and a half is this guy Rollo Tomassi and his book, The Rational Male Series. Now, Rollo Tomassi, as you may or may not know, is a character it's a non-character. It's from the book and movie LA Confidential, and it's Guy Pearce's character, who's talking about the man who got away. He's trying to come up with somebody who, it's like a nom de plume for the guilty party, right? So it's kind of clever, but it's the same thing with these guys, is that they're all using their video game monikers, their internet monikers, their pseudonyms. But so anyway, Rollo Tomassi, hugely influential in the space. He wrote this Rational Male series. He's still publishing these. This is the original one. He's got like a whole book series of this stuff. And then he's got a new one that just came out here, Reignite the Rational Male. Still cranking these out. And these are totally self-published. And because they're self-published, it has the same, as long as problems of their self-publication works, which is that they're not very well edited, and they're riddled with spelling errors, and they're repetitive, and so forth. And so he still has not gone back. I think the business model for these guys is like, produce your red pill manifesto and space it out as much as you can so that you can get more revenue because you're selling more books. And then once you've done that, just move on to the next one. It's just like the next podcast episode, which really annoys me. I don't like podcasts because, as you know, podcasts have a structure, and the structure is that they need to get you. It's like a show. You have to come back and watch more. So you have to space it out. You have to interview people. You have to talk really slowly. You have to sip your coffee. And so on and so forth. And so there's a particular pattern to them and the way they talk and everything. And it's again, it's all has this, to me, it's very it's just that the basis of what they're doing, the thing in and of itself is trying to sell you something, trying to market something, which is of course ultimately themselves. They're really marketing themselves to you. And the idea is, if you follow them and read them, you could be like them, right? Anyway, now, Rollo Tomassi is interesting for two reasons, okay? The first is, like I said, he's following this kind of Pook, taking it from and Robert Glover, taking it from the internet and self-publishing it and making that a business, making that a real business model. That's important. The prior to that, you had to be if you were Mystery or Strauss, you were like a journalist, you had formal publishing connections, you were actually in the industry, or you were like you're on TV, even I'm thinking of Andrew Tate, for example, was on Big Brother, wasn't it, right? So there's, and then Mystery had his own, the show, the Pick Up Artist. So it's you had the reality TV. But that's you're in an official, structure. And the idea with these guys, they started taking all their terminology, of course, from the Matrix, red pill, blue pill, blah, blah, blah. And what they're, that was too constraining for them somehow, and they had to break out of that. And the self-publishing was and podcasting was how they did this. And but it evolved from posting on internet forums. And so if you go read the archives, these red pill archives, you can see these guys have these they've produced a lot of material, and that was then boiled down, into distilled, if you will, into their the stuff that they did publish, these self-published books, which you can now go and read. Now, you can, of course, like I said, go to the archive and read that stuff, but it's really too much to do unless you're crazy. And there are some people who do that, including this guy, Rian Stone, who's a follower of, I'll just point him out now, he's a follower, because he's actually not as interesting as you might think, but he's a follower of Tomassi, and what he did This is him. This is his series. What he did was the exact same thing. He took the Tomassi formula and then replicated it because they were on the same forum together. And really, what he did was just read a hell of a lot of these case reports, the after action reports, of the field reports of these guys. Now, Rian Stone himself was like a Canadian naval officer, and I think his first book really shows you where where he's coming from. I'll just show you that. Okay, you tell me if this guy looks like he's a real deep intellectual thinker to you. And then where he went with that, though, is this praxology thing. Okay, so you see, so now it's not just the fuck files anymore, guys. This is his latest one. It's now part of a praxology, okay? And it's like you can see, and he got this from fucking Rollo Tomassi, but what he's doing is they're trying to give some kind of intellectual foundation to the behavioralist thing that he's actually doing, which is I'm sitting on the internet reading case reports and like reading reports about guys trying to get laid. And but so this is significant because they're trying to elevate it in some way, trying to make it more viable to an educated audience, or like to raise the bar a little bit in that regard. But Stone is funny in this particular regard because he's, like I said, he's copying praxology thing that Tomassi went after really started doing it in his books. So he's copying that for one, and he's copying the same structure. There's like dread, frame, blah blah. These are this concepts that go back in the POA community thing. So like it's not original is important there. And then because it's self-published, they're not very well done. They're like riddled with errors. He just kind of copied them off his internet, and like he has a lot of podcasts like all these guys do, and that's sort of their main where they're coming from is the podcasting thing, and then they convert their podcasts or their case reports or whatever into their books. And so, like I said, they're riddled with errors. They're not very well edited. The language isn't, they don't have editors. So, but they're I'm sure making bank because they're spacing out these like podcasts into a lot of books and publishing them. Another guy who does this is this guy, Joseph South. And this is just a small selection. I have more of this stuff. Kill the Nice Guy, note that. Practical female psychology, right? Like, note this. But what he's doing, this is, I believe, it was a podcast series that he runs or still runs, I don't know. And then has just been publishing these on and on and on indefinitely. And like, has a lot of them now. And again, people, so he's making, this has become the business, is you do the PUA stuff, you run the boot camps, maybe you make you charge for that, but then you also go on the podcast circuits, and then you get your clips on TikTok, right? And you're making getting lots of views, lots of attraction there, so there's like a sales marketing component to this, and then you're also a performative component because you're on the podcast talking and chatting, so that's a very performative industry. And then the next phase of that is you reduce that into a book and you sell the book, and that gives you residuals, and you self-publish that. And of course you sort of have to self-publish it because unless you're embedded in the system in some kind of formal way, you're not going to get published anyway, especially by people who think it's saturated or whatever. But there is as you can see that the fact that these guys are successful at doing this proves that there is a market for this, which there's a lot of frustrated, confused men out there who are trying to get the secret or whatever. The answer is like, what's that woman's name who came with the secret? Like it all goes back to this business thing. It's this assumption that you're living in a completely econometric universe, and that that but at the same time there's like this Jungian collective unconsciousness component to it, and the vibe, and if you can tap into the vibe in your state, and then you can like the things will attract to you. This is all like Stephen Covey or Napoleon Hill, and it goes back to the early American hustle business culture. Frankly. So anyway, so South and Rian Stone are good examples of this, but the one who's the like biggest example of this, I'll talk about him in just a second because I actually do want to, it's Nick Krauser, but I want to touch on the Evo Psych thing because I think I mentioned it, but it's important because this was the other thing that Rollo Tomassi did, and all these other guys copied this. They just went with this. So like as you know, the evolutionary psychology is like a newer component of the psychology discipline. So we were talking about earlier, like the behavioralism, and then you have like the humanism, Carl Rogers, and like the self-actualizers, Maslow, and so on. And then, but the guys who became very popular when the neuroscience technology got better and so on, in the late like the 80s, 90s, that time frame, was the evolutionary psychologists, and they were arguing like through again kind of a base of neuroscience and Richard Dawkins, selfish gene stuff, that you could have. You could get down to the basis. This is the problem of the Skinnerites, of the behavioralists. They could say, this is what Skinner's point was. is you don't know what the hell is happening inside the human brain. So how do you know what the basis for the behavior is anyway? But the neuroscientists were saying, well, maybe we can actually get to the bottom of this, by doing these studies. And now the important thing here, though, is there was a question of how much of your behavior is determined by genetics that are, ancient, right? They go back hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years, to early human origins. And this was for whatever reason, I think because it fits in this kind of like Jack Donovan, ruthless power monger universe that these guys live in, or that they've articulated, the ideology of it, which is again business ideology, but like the idea that the behavior is coming from the Stone Age, it's coming from the Ice Age, it's coming from 200,000 years ago when the men were out there like real men with their spears defending women and hunting, and the women were at home or whatever, the hunter-gatherers are gathering, and so they wanted men to protect them, and so they had their RK selection, and like they had to, they needed the alpha male to do that for them, and so this is why they're attracted to that, and so the assumption is that there's a totally biological basis for this, right, for the behavior. Okay, and there's a bunch of guys, these evil psych guys, who do that, and then have popularized it, which I've got two here. There's more, even like what's his name? Jordan Peterson is sort of like this. Like I think his brother's a neuroscientist, and he's like, or brother-in-law's a neuroscientist. He's like an evil psych type guy. But so the two that I've just got on hand, Miller, The Mating Mind. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, and then this guy Ridley, The Red Queen, and there's also the Evolution of Desire by David Buss. And so like there's quite a few of these guys very popular today because this the genetic technology has caught up, and the genome sequencing and so on has a sort of enabled this to be possible. So the idea that the behaviors are being determined by what are essentially animalistic, like anthropological behaviors going back hundreds of thousands of years is the basis of this this argument. And so like that sexual selection is really what's driving everything, and the selfish genes, and that this is the people, us, we're not even making the decisions are being made at some kind of subconscious level again, which we don't even, but I would say this is not even necessarily new in the POA community, because if you know about mystery, well, one of his favorite concepts is peacocking, and I checked this out. It is in fact in the index, in the glossary rather, to the game. Yeah, here, peacock, verb. To dress in loud clothing or with flashy accoutrements in order to get attention from women. Peacocking includes yada yada, origin, mystery. Stand out from the crowd. Now, he got this from the male peacock concept, and this is cited by all of these evopsych people, where they especially when they talk about the sexual selection. The peacock, it has the male peacock has a big huge feather plumage behind it to attract the peahen, and this is it's silly because from a energy expenditure point, because it takes so much energy to produce this, and it makes them a target and so on and so forth, but in a Darwinian evolutionary sense, but then it's necessary for their sexual selection. So like that's a thing that, and humans obviously are just like peacocks, right? So you can see how attractive that is as like an analogy, and as a literary analogy even. But I find it fucking frankly ridiculous, because to me the notion that there's anything like that the Ice Age reality is in any way comparable to your modern industrial technological civilization is preposterous, frankly, right? Like you're not hunting for food with your spear. There's not a good chance you're gonna die just like fucking walking down the street, like. So this whole thing is preposterous, and I'm of the opinion that behavior, like I said, I'd go with the behavioral school in this. I think that it's much more likely to be determined by social, political constraints and economic constraints and so on. And this is a different argument, though. This is really a philosophical argument about what is the ideology that we're dealing with, the epistemology of ideology, really. But I'll leave that for another time, what have you. The point I'm making is, evopsych, because this kind of confluence of an evolutionary biology, because this confluence of factors became wildly popular in the same time that there was this transition taking place between from the old school PUA formalized version to this new like internet manosphere version, and they latched onto this, and you will hear them cite these evopsych examples again and again and again, and it's so tedious because they're so fucking wrong, for one, and then also because, like I said, it's so obvious where this is coming from, but they will never tell you this. The thing that really annoys me about this, all of these people generally, is that they will not tell you, just to give you the list, which is ultimately what I'm trying to do here, like, here's the books you got to read, just read these books, like, you go back to the basics. You want to learn something about this? Go read Freud, go read Charles Darwin, again, go do some research on psychology. Why would you read Robert Greene's distilled version, his decontextualized version of Machiavellianism and Baltasar Gracian and like Stirner, when you can just go read Stirner yourself, or you can just go read, like if it's coming from an Ayn Rand libertarian perspective, you should know something about Ayn Rand libertarianism, whatever it is. But so they tend not to do that because it's a business, and if they tell you where they got their ideas from, generally speaking, you would then go look at those ideas and not them. And you would not, like I said, these guys are still publishing. So I was just showing you the example of Rian Stone, who had just got his new one out, and Rollo Tomassi just has his new one out. So they're still part of this business. It's a business model for them. But they needed the foundation of the PUA environment to kind of get started on that. And like I was going to, so the guy who's the I think sort of the most important in this, and one of the most successful ones, is this guy Nick Krauser, who did the London day game model. I skipped over Heartiste. I'll mention him just briefly in a second, but I wanted to talk about Krauser. So he's got a whole series of books, of which these are the ones, like this is if you're doing this mystery method and all that kind of jazz, and you go on to like what's after that, it's the day game stuff by Krauser. And so he's got like here day game mastery and like infinite, day game infinite, and he wrote this. He's still writing this like epic series memoir and these books, by the way, are not cheap, and this is an ongoing memoir series. He thinks he's trying to be like Casanova or something, or again, it might just be part of the business model for him. But what he's trying to detail is the own history of what he was doing in the London day game sphere, and his concepts about adventure sex and how you have to, you go to Eastern Europe because they're, I don't know, poorer and you can exploit them more easily, and they're more susceptible to your techniques because they haven't learned about them yet. I don't know. But anyway, it's interesting that he's very often hitting on rather young women who might not know better. Let's just put it that way. And then some who should probably know, older women who probably should know better. But anyway, hugely successful, Nick Krauser, and these are, again, not cheap. He's made a big business out of this, and you'll check the podcast, he's doing the same thing all these other guys are doing. He's selling you this model, this game style that he's supposedly invented, and they're very good. Like, that's the thing, this is part of the deal here. Like, look at the graphics he uses, right? Like, look at the systemization of that. He's very logical guy, or like, it's part of that. So he's got lots of illustrations. That's really important in your PUA book, because you need to have illustrations, because people are, these guys can't read anything and they're too stupid and they're too superficial, so you have to illustrate them. So like, he does that. He's got lots of photos. It's very well documented. You have to prove that you did this stuff. You can't just say that you did it, because here's an interesting thing about Nick Krauser, for example. He was posting all this shit on the internet before he produced these memoirs anyway. So, and I have looked at some of that, and I will tell you it doesn't exactly line up with the way he describes it in his memoirs. So he's definitely embellishing things a little bit, and he wrote them out of order too. So he's still like working on an earlier volume of it and like trying to go back and do this. So it's all kind of scrambled up, and you want to make yourself look good too. That's important. But like I said, so a key thing is for the modern PUA literary type, you got to be on top of the Evo Psych. You also have to be like aware of the ideology, which is, for Krauser, it's like it's right wing. It's like a right wing ideology. It's like he's a Eurosceptic, anti-globalist, anti-immigration, etc. Like he has all these very like conservative right wing kind of ideologies, which go back. There seems to be a clear connection here, or some kind of connection between the Evo Psych manosphere side of it, the evolutionary biological side of it, and then the like right-wing Donald Trump supporting component of it. And the guy who I was going to mention, Heartiste, because he's one of the best, but he did the same. He was one of these guys on the internet, Chateau Heartiste, right? This is him. He's got a couple of volumes of his books, and he was a big early proponent of Donald Trump. As you know, Donald Trump before he ran for president in 2016. He was saying he was going to do it for a while before that. I guess this is what you do after you do The Apprentice. You got to bigger and better, right? Got to do something. So he was talking about this, and Heartiste had said that he will probably run, and so on. So now the misogyny that Heartiste is working on is kind of another level of it. This is why I like him, because it's very pure in this sense. Like he's quite witty, and he's funny, and he's clever, and hugely prolific. He wrote, like, his blog again just goes on and on and on and on, and it's distilled down into just those two books. I wish there were more, frankly. So I don't even know if it's him necessarily publishing those. It could be somebody else taking the profits. But if he is, then do more is my recommendation. But he's got this again, very like kind of like. Can't stand he's in Washington D.C. trying to hit on these. He goes to these bars around Washington D.C. trying to hit on staffers, Politico staffers, and like lawyers and stuff. And he hates lawyer women. He can't stand them, because they're not feminine enough. They're too logical for him and misogynistic. And he's such a misogynist, so on. But what I like about him is in the Robert Greene sense, he's very pure about it. He's honest. He's honest about his misogyny and his like ruthless Machiavellian, Baltasar Gracian, like Stirnerist, libertarian ideology. So, which is funny because it's complete protectionism. It's the same thing they accuse women of. So say, they're solipsistic, self-centered. This is something Rollo Tomassi says all the time. Women are like innately solipsists. And why are they solipsists? Well, because when they were evolving, they had to, blah, blah, blah. But like, convenient that, which by the way, Tomassi only has a BA, I think, in psychology. So if even that, like a BSc. So he's not much of a fucking psychologist anyway, and like he's like a liquor salesman. I think sales. Note the sales component there. But so you gotta hustle, gotta be hustling. Anyway, so Heartiste at least is like Tomassi and these other guys, Rian Stone. They kind of try to dress it up because they're proctologists now. There's proctology. It's more sophisticated than just the red pill, blue pill, stupid matrix analogy. It's like you're not just a computer nerd, action hero, internet guy. You're now a practitioner, right? So there's more than that. But they try to dress it up to give it some kind of intellectual foundation, because they realize, I think, underneath it all, that the ideology they're operating on is quite shallow, and so they want to believe that it's not, to justify their actions, their own behavior, which is difficult to justify, frankly. Like from any kind of moralist standpoint, I've watched these videos, these interviews with these people, and they podcast, and they always are struggling when you ask them about they asked about the morality of what they're doing, right? And they have not surprisingly to me, they have a lot of trouble articulating that. Anyway, but so Heartiste, I like him because he's pure. It's just, this is like, I am just a totally ruthless Machiavellian guy. And like, Pook was more, he was even trying to do it at kind of a artistic level some way. Like he was trying to tap in again to the mill that's like collective unconscious cultural foundation, tie it in with the Renaissance, and even Robert Greene, right? Like this, at least he's using real historical examples, trying to make it elevated in some way. Tertius like, nah, it's just, I'm just a ruthless guy, misogynist out there trying to hit on chicks, right? Like boff these women. So anyway, so at least it's honest. Trump supporter, there's honesty to it. So anyway, so there's this there's kind of split the day game, night game guys. I don't know. I don't think there's much to this really, because again, when you actually look at these models, which again, these like Nick Krauser stuff, not cheap, selling these for quite a bit of cash. The model is bullshit. The model is like a joke. These are like long books. These are 500 pages of this. This is like 1,000 pages plus the memoirs. There's probably like 2,000 pages right there. But ultimately, what it is just like go out on the street and stop a woman and talk to her that you find attractive, and act like you think she's attractive. Then follow the mystery method. Build comfort and rapport and invite her to a date. Get her number. So that's it. It's so fucking straightforward and simple and stupid. And like they have to, but I think again, these guys have to themselves, they have to be able to convince themselves that they're not just running a con. It's not just a con game. It's not just a confidence scam. It's not just a sales, what you would call a grift or something like that. That they're in some way they want to be. Although they're all just kind of very shallow people, they want to be like a Robert Glover. Like, so in some way, they're fundamentally introducing new knowledge into the community, and they're helping the men and maybe even the women, and it's to adapt and deal with the sexual marketplace that they've constructed. But again, to me, this is all fucking fundamentally ideological, because it's all based on these ideological presumptions, which are not true necessarily, or at least debatable. And I would much rather see these guys challenge those assumptions and have some debates about that than just take them a priori, which they always do. They never challenge them. It's always just, oh yeah, it's a sexual marketplace, and oh yeah, it's evolutionary biology, and so on, which I find really annoying and shallow, especially when you can go to the research yourself, and it's very clear that there is a background to this. I would say you would be, this is sort of my concluding, wrapping up comments here. I'll give you one more, before I say that, I will have one more example, because two more examples. So another day gamer is this guy, Alex Forrest. Same thing, podcast, books, memoir, with, things following the model here, 100%. and he's a kind of interesting guy because he's a little bit older. So he's like, I think at the time he was nearing his 50s, like Robert Glover. So the older guys are obviously more compelling to read and are more interesting to read because they are a little more self-reflective, and so they're not, and they're actually are asking some of these questions that these other dudes aren't asking. So that's one that's worth checking out as well. I was going to say Andrew Tate, some of his stuff is worth it, but it's not because he really has nothing, to be honest. I mean, this is the thing, like his main thing is these podcasts, and like his internet TikTok personality is the thing. And so there's nothing to grab onto there. I don't think he's ever written a book, frankly. However, a guy who's kind of in a similar situation is Dan Bilzerian. Like this is a memoir here. Just knew the setup, and again, this is like I want to say this is like the gold standard on how you do this, guys. So this is not cheap for one, and it looks great, hardcover. It's got nice short chapters. This is important because the guys that people are going to read this are, stupid and they can't read, and so they need to be short chapters. And look, Russian hitman, salacious, and like he's got lots of pictures. Here he is with a Barrett 50 cal sniper rifle. It's all militarized. That's what you want. Your Call of Duty players. Nick Krauser talks about this. He admits it. He spends a lot of time playing Call of Duty. These guys all have this, a very like hyper masculine, but here he is again shooting a bazooka. Yeah. So I remember Dan Bilzerian from Russian FPS videos. I think he was like shooting off machine guns with Russian FPS Russia in like Las Vegas. Okay, so that's and failing to be a Navy SEAL. To me, it's always so again when you look at them from the behavioralist perspective, it's the behavior is so shallow and so superficial, and they're so narcissistic and like solid egotistical, etc. that you think oh man, nobody could be interested. Nobody could fall for this. But they're good salesmen. Like they understand marketing. A lot of these guys get business background, lawyer background, like law. They get how the system works, and that's why they call themselves like these. They use the name from the Matrix, the red pill stuff. Why they use those terminologies. It's because they believe that they really are imparting to you some kind of deep, profound wisdom about the structure of the system and how they figured it out for you. This all goes back to the mystery method, right? And the Ross Jeffreies, you go right back to the very beginning. It's all part of this, like, the idea that there's a secret community. It's very conspiratorial, and so I think it's very fringe, right? These guys, they have to be part of that because it's not, they're doing something different. We're outside the norm. We're challenging these views. Yet, ironically, as I say, their views, when you actually look at them, are totally simplified versions of basically psychology and biology doctrines. And I was going to say, you could do worse. I think I've covered all this. But yeah, you could do worse than just reading like Freud. Just go get this, like, here, go get the basic writings of Freud. Go read some of his stuff. Go read the Jung about the collective unconscious and the archetypes, right? Go read Maslow, with the human actualization. Go read Rogers on the humanism. Just like, go read the works of William James. You could, the primary sources are there. You could all you have to do, if you really want to get down to it, you could do a lot worse than just looking, reading the fundamentals, the basics, and then you will be better. Go read Charles Darwin. You'll be better situated when you start encountering the ideology that these guys are selling and marketing. And I think that would set you up a lot better for success. It certainly save you time than just trying to dive into this the way I did it, because like I said, there's a lot of stuff, and you will end up reading a lot of garbage too. This is the best of it. I'm talking about, these are the guys who are worth reading, right? You can imagine the dross of the crap that's not worth reading. The people who don't have books, like I said, don't even try to produce their memoirs, don't even try to write the Casanova of the 21st century. So it could be a lot. There's a lot worse level of this, and these are the guys who are doing it at the highest level, and even then it's pretty fucking shallow. So like I say, ultimately what you're going to take away from this, I think, is what is happening is a ideological development in the kind of like fringe right wing. We could say we could politicize it. I don't even think it's worth politicizing because everybody's. But that's again different discussion. But there is a important internet libertarian, they're politicizing, but it's not even like self-publishing, masculine construction through group therapy analysis and psychotherapy and neurolinguistic programming and breaking yourself down and reformulating everything, and then becoming successful through a business model, a econometric a salesmanship model, which is then applicable to your fucking dating life. And so and if you intuit, supposedly, if you intuit the lessons and the method and the techniques, then that's, and of all these people, even people who are critics of it, like the Robert Glovers of the world, are still producing a technique. It's an anti-technique in a way, but there's still a technique. Then that will lead you towards what you really want in life and success and so on and so forth. And I'm saying you can do that, but you'll be you're chasing your own tail. You're pursuing a simplified version. And like I said, my God, if you're just looking at the podcast or something, you're getting like a third order version of somebody's crap analysis of what is, what the actual history of psychology is, okay, or the actual history of evolutionary biology. And so I recommend go back to the basics. Freud and Jung were smarter than all of these guys, and and there's a reason they have an entire discipline following them, and that occurred because of them. So you should go, William James, go read them, and you will do a lot better than trying to come at this backwards. Although it's a journey in that regard, I will say. Some of these memoirs are pretty fun to read. I do enjoy them, just again on a literary basis, and it's fun to pick them apart because they're so easy to pick apart. By the way, so that's it. Good luck, everybody.